Welcome back to the deep dive.
Great to be back.
So today we are tackling something pretty significant. We're taking a critical look into the fallout of those September 2nd boat strikes.
Right, in the Caribbean. And this is really fraught territory.
It is. We're talking about alleged war crimes, these shifting political narratives, and what really looks like a profound crisis of command responsibility within the U.S. military.
That's it, exactly. Our mission today is to sort of synthesize this stack of sources you've pulled together, news transcripts detailing the White House's defense, congressional inquiries.
And some really incredible internal Pentagon commentary.
Yes. And the key focus here isn't just reporting what happened. It's about defining the exact legal, moral, and strategic lines that were allegedly crossed.
And who is trying to avoid accountability.
We
really have to cut through all the spin and get straight to the legal heart of this. The sources are detailing, outright accusations of unlawful killing. And they suggest that leaders are doing some serious narrative shuffling to protect themselves. So we need to define command responsibility, what an unlawful order actually means, under military law.
And why the administration's main justification, this term narrow terrorist, is so legally contested.
Okay, so before we get into the weeds, let's just establish the facts as we understand them from the sources.
Right. Let's start with what's undisputed. The sequence of events begins with U.S. forces conducting a lethal strike on an alleged drug vessel.
And the boat is destroyed.
The boat is destroyed. The entire controversy, the thing that triggered this whole congressional demand for evidence, it all centers on a reported secondary action.
The double tap.
What the sources are calling a double tap, targeting individuals who are left defenseless in the water.
And this is where the legal community seems to speak with, well, one voice. And it's chilling.
It is.
Democratic Congressman Jim Himes, in one of the transcripts, he put it so bluntly. He said, "Deliberately targeting people, regardless of who they are, who are in distress, particularly on the high seas, is a war crime, full stop."
And that full stop is so critical because this isn't about some hazy, gray area in the rules of engagement.
No.
And retired Major General Stephen Lepper went even further. He described the alleged act as, and this is a quote, no less than murder.
Wow.
Yeah. And to really get the weight of that, you have to understand the fundamental shift in military doctrine that happens right after that first strike.
Okay, let's unpack that doctrine because it sounds like it's the absolute core of the war crime allegation.
It is. Precisely. For any naval officer operating under the DOD law of war standards, the moment that first strike shipwrecks those sailors, the moment they are rendered, or to call that out of the fight, defenseless, the operational duty shifts completely. The legal requirement is no longer attack, it is rescue.
So it's not a choice, it's a requirement.
It's an absolute requirement under international law, which U.S. forces are bound by. Targeting people who are defenseless in the water is, it's a textbook example of an unlawful order.
And military personnel are required to disobey an unlawful order.
They are bound by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ, to disobey orders that violate international law. So the question just becomes, who failed to honor that boundary?
That is such a critical distinction. So the boundary isn't subjective. It's this duty to rescue. But instead of rescue, we get these allegations of a second lethal strike, which brings us to how the administration tried to justify this.
Right, with this highly debated label of narrow terrorists.
The administration's defense, and it was primarily articulated by Secretary of Defense Hegseth, was completely centered on this aggressive terminology.
And a strategy of deterrence. He basically said the strikes were always meant to be lethal. It was part of this new strategy to just eliminate narrow terrorists.
Instead of the old arrest and handover approach.
Right, the rinse and repeat approach, as he called it.
And his language was so clear, he said they were taking the gloves off. And he justified it by saying it was working, citing a statistic that drugs coming in by sea were down 91%.
The message was clear. The threat is so severe, it justifies a severe response.
But it's fascinating how quickly the legal critics just, tore that narrow terrorist designation apart.
Oh, immediately. Including Congressman Himes and the legal analyst Andrew McCarthy. They both pointed out that drug traffickers, however dangerous they are, they're just not considered terrorists under the U.S. legal system.
Himes called it a very thin line. He argued it was a desperate attempt to make drug cartels look like ISIS or Al-Qaeda.
Exactly. The goal, according to these critics, was to kind of create a legal fiction, something that would justify using the military outside of normal law enforcement constraints.
And maybe even excuse that second strike.
And potentially excuse the second strike.
Yeah.
And this creates what one source called the repatriation paradox.
All right, what's that?
Well, it gives you this really chilling insight into their legal thinking. So the administration claims these individuals were, quote, horribly awful, part of the Trenda Aragnaro terrorist organization.
Responsible for thousands of American deaths, they said.
Right. And yet, 2 of the survivors from the strike were rescued and then just repatriated to their own countries.
Yeah.
Sent home.
That's the disconnect, isn't it? That's what you, the listener, have to really wrestle with here.
It is.
We're basically seeing the administration try to create this third, extra-legal category of person.
Someone dangerous enough to be executed on site by the military.
But not, I guess, with enough prosecutable evidence to actually face trial in a U.S. court.
It raises that fundamental question. If the U.S. had enough conclusive evidence to justify a lethal strike, why on earth didn't we have enough evidence to detain and prosecute the 2 who survived?
The paradox suggests the justification was political, maybe operational.
But not strictly illegal, no.
And that failure in legal rationale leads us straight into maybe the most damaging part of this whole thing from the sources, the accountability crisis.
Yeah. When the accusation surfaced, who authorized that second strike? And who stood up to take responsibility?
The initial story was just confusion.
Yeah.
And deflection.
A lot of deflection. The administration first denied the second strike happened at all.
But then the evidence became undeniable.
And once it did, they acknowledged it, but they immediately shifted the responsibility down the chain of command, focusing specifically on Admiral Mitch Bradley.
Right. They called him an American hero who made the right call.
Which is an interesting way to put it.
But wait, how does that even square with what Secretary Hegseth himself said? The sources report he claimed to have watched it live.
The first strike.
The first strike. But then when he was pressed on the fatal second strike, he suddenly brings up the fog of war.
And claims he'd gone to other meetings and never saw the second strike.
That just seems suspiciously convenient.
It does. And it immediately puts that leadership at odds with this centuries-long, deeply ingrained tradition of command accountability in the U.S. Navy.
Can you explain that a bit?
Well, the sources really emphasize the old maxim. You can delegate authority, but you cannot delegate responsibility. When something goes wrong on a ship, the captain answers for it. Always.
So, by praising Bradley while also pinning the controversial act on him,
they're trying to delegate the responsibility downward, which is just completely antithetical to military culture.
And that attempt at what looks like scapegoating, it apparently sparked a huge internal crisis.
A massive one. According to these transcripts, there is furious backlash inside the Defense Department. Officials are alarmed by the attempt to shift blame.
They called it Protect Pete BS.
They did, and said that the administration is throwing us these service members under the bus. I mean, that's not just a policy disagreement.
No, that's a total collapse of trust between the political leadership and the uniformed military.
And that internal fury is what has been fueling the congressional inquiry. Lawmakers are demanding total transparency.
They want the videos, the audio tapes of the entire strike.
All of it. Evidence, which was reportedly delayed, by the way, beyond the time required by law. And they want to talk to Admiral Bradley, and very significantly, they want to talk to the recently resigned Southcom commander, Admiral Holley.
Okay, so why is Admiral Holley so important here?
Well, he oversaw the entire command structure in that region. If an unlawful order was either given or executed, he would have been senior enough, or certainly close enough to have, as one source put it, some views on what he saw happen in that command room.
So this brings us right back to the unlawful order.
It all comes back to that. A senior official has a legal binding requirement to stop a subordinate from executing an unlawful order.
If the Secretary of Defense was there, or if the order came from higher up?
The responsibility rests there. If an order essentially says no surrender, no survivors, that order itself violates the law of war, and every single officer involved has a duty to stop it.
This attempt to shift blame, then, it points to a really terrifying precedent, doesn't it? A willingness by leadership to just use the military without any restraint.
It does. And we should broaden the lens here because the sources suggest this incident raises much deeper questions about the military's own internal ethos and discipline when it's faced with potentially illegal orders.
Right.
The fear expressed by some of the military experts in these sources is an erosion of that internal discipline, of the military's ethical firewall. The U.S. military is explicitly designed not to be used for certain domestic jobs.
Like they shouldn't be running drunk driving checkpoints.
Exactly, or acting as a federal police force protecting buildings from protesters.
One of the sources posed this really serious question. It was, an authoritarian leader wants unified command over everybody with a gun to be able to use them without restraint, maybe even against their own people. Will the military allow themselves to be used that way?
And this is where that internal discipline, that willingness of officers to stand on the side of the UCMJ and the Constitution, even against their own commanders, that becomes the firewall.
The willingness to say, that is an unlawful order, and I will not execute it.
That phrase may ultimately be the only distinction between a republic and a dictatorship.
And that theme, political ambition, overriding ethical or military strategy, it actually connects to another related foreign policy topic that was mentioned in the sources.
The proposed peace deal for Ukraine and Russia.
Yes.
Is connected by motive. Critics pointed out that the president seemed desperate for a Nobel Peace Prize, and that was motivating this sudden push for settlement.
But there was more to it than that, right?
Oh, yeah. There were suggestions of highly lucrative business opportunities linked to unfreezing Russian assets. The motto was basically, make business, not war.
So the goal wasn't just a stable peace. It was a visible, award-worthy political win,
coupled with some very significant financial opportunities for people associated with the deal.
So how did critics see this deal?
They saw the proposed 28-point plan not as a real peace deal, but as an effective surrender deal for Ukraine.
And the consequence?
The consequence was clear. It would reward Vladimir Putin for a brutal, murderous invasion by letting him gain something for his aggression.
Just because those business plans seem so lucrative.
Right. It mirrors the Caribbean incident in its willingness to compromise these established ethical and strategic boundaries for, immediate political or financial gain.
This whole deep dive has just exposed this razor-thin line between legal military action and alleged war crimes.
And the absolute necessity of military leaders upholding the law, even in these high-pressure settings.
Yeah.
The core tension we've looked at is whether the leadership, the ones who immediately try to delegate accountability downward, will actually be able to escape responsibility.
Because military tradition, the law itself, demands accountability goes up.
Exactly. And when you have reports that the entire Defense Department is furious, it suggests this issue is very, very far from settled.
So for you, the listener, here's a final thought to explore. In a world where there is video evidence, there are audio logs for pretty much every single military action. What does the resistance to releasing that evidence, that delay Congress faced, what does that imply about the role of oversight and accountability in our government?
It's a huge question.
Consider how fiercely the internal discipline and ethics in the U.S. military must be protected as they are repeatedly tested by political ambition.
Thank you for allowing us to guide you through this really crucial deep dive into the sources.
We hope this has provided the context and, the insight needed to understand just how serious these allegations are. We'll catch you next time.